Chapter 1. Marcus Wells watched as his client walked out of his office, running his fingers through his hair. Another divorce. He was starting to wonder if people ever really had good marriages, but then he looked at his grandparents, and he knew they did. He wanted that for himself, but there were no single women left in town. Culpepper, Wyoming, had been victimized by the men's underwear industry. One of the local ranchers had opened up his home for an underwear shoot, and all of the women in town had kindly volunteered their time. When a sudden spring snowstorm blew into town, the women had been stranded with the men. Many weddings had occurred once the roads were passable. He leaned back in his chair and frowned. The only single ladies who had come to town in years had been the Quinlan quadruplets, and they'd been spoken for by the 4 Culpeppers since the day they arrived. Marcus frowned. He was not a fan of the Culpeppers. The youngest boy, Chris, had been in his class at school. The girls had always fawned over Chris and ignored Marcus, who even then had been very studious. Of course, Chris had been smart too, but in an outdoorsy cowboyish way. He stood and walked to the small window of his office, which looked onto Main Street of Culpepper. He saw Joy Culpepper, formerly Quinlan, leave the grocery store and head to her car. The woman was beautiful and had said something to him about bringing her younger sister out to meet him from Kentucky. He thought for a moment, trying to remember the sister's name. Oh. Right. Grace. If she was half as beautiful as her older sisters, then he was more than willing to give it a shot. He'd never really believed in arranged marriages, but more and more, they seemed like a really good idea to him. He wished he could just call someone and they would send him a bride, complete with dress and veil, ready to walk down the aisle. He frowned for a moment. Joy had said she would try. He wondered if she'd contacted her sister. Rushing out the door to his office, he ran across the street. "Do you need help putting your groceries in the truck, Joy?" Joy looked around and smiled. "Oh, hi, Marcus. I would adore some help. Morning sickness has set in, and I'm just not feeling like doing a whole lot, but for some reason, Colby still insists on eating. What is it with those Culpeppers? They get all the prettiest girls, and then they expect them to cook and clean. They should hire maids for you and put you on pedestals." Joy laughed. "I wasn't raised to be put on a pedestal. Speaking of your raising, did you ever talk to your sister about me?" "Grace?" "I did, but it's been a while. They're getting ready to come out here. I can have her meet you for lunch one day." Marcus nodded. "I'd like that a lot. In fact, get her to agree to marry me as soon as she arrives." Joy shrugged. She thought about contacting the matchmaker who set us up with the Culpepper men. "I don't think she'd be terribly opposed to meeting you and having a short engagement." "Really?" He couldn't help but wonder what the girl looked like if she'd be willing to date a stranger. Not that looks mattered too much to him, but he did want to make sure he was attracted to her. "Do you have a picture of her?" She pulled out her phone and flipped through the photos while he put her groceries onto the back seat of the truck for her. "Oh, here she is." She held up her phone for him to see her sister Grace. He looked down at the petite-looking blonde on the phone and nodded. "She's pretty." Beautiful was more like it. "Absolutely stunning." "She is. And she's very sweet, and more importantly, she can make the best cakes and cupcakes you've ever tasted. I've been trying to get her to move here and open a bakery." He nodded, slowly. That would be a great idea. Right now we only have the small bakery in the grocery store, and they certainly can't provide wedding cakes. Or anything like that. I'm going to call her again tonight and see if I can light a fire under her. I know she's been talking to 2 of our cousins and her twin about coming with her. I can understand bringing her twin, but why the cousins? Soon the entire population of Culpepper would be outnumbered by the Quinlans. Well, our cousins, Patience and Felicity, make pies and cookies. The 3 of them are perfect business partners. Honor is a bit of a tomboy, much to Mom's horror. He grinned at that. Why her horror? Looking at the pretty girl in front of him, he couldn't imagine her sister being a tomboy. There was no way. Joy frowned. You don't know our family, or you'd understand. We were raised to be ladylike at all times and to excel in housewifely tasks. Cooking, sewing, cleaning, and crafts. Honor hates all of that. She tilted her head to one side. Well, she loves woodworking. Is that a craft? I guess. But Grace doesn't hate all of that? Nope, Grace is more like the rest of us. I'll talk to her tonight. Want me to let you know what she says? If you wouldn't mind, I'd really like that. Marcus smiled. I know that. Colby has my number. He won't mind if you call, will he? Nope. He won't mind a bit. She looked at the shopping cart and saw he'd put everything away. Thanks for your help. No problem. Marcus watched her get into the car and drive away, his mind on the girl in the photo she'd shown him. Hopefully she would be as sweet as she looked. Asterisk. Grace was in her room, sneaking her favorite show on Netflix when her sister, Joy, called her. She wasn't allowed to watch the show because there was too much kissing involved, but she was almost 21 for gosh sakes. How much could it hurt? She knew all about sex and kissing. Not that she'd ever done either. She pressed the pause button on Lazy Love before answering the phone. Hey, Joy. How's Wyoming? We need you here. Joy's voice was firm. We've got lots of stuff on its way there. We've already started packing boxes and shipping them. Are you sure your mother-in-law can handle 4 of us? Yes. She took all 4 of us in when we got there, and now we're all married off and out of her house. Time for you to invade. Honor loves the idea of going out there and playing cowgirl, and Patience and Felicity want to open the bakery. They're shipping stuff too. Better start watching for it. Grace paused, looking at her favorite heroine, Jo, frozen on the screen of her iPad. We're planning on leaving on Friday. Should be there around noonish on Sunday. Oh, I'm so excited. I talked to Linda, and she said you guys could use the second bunkhouse for the bakery because it has a commercial kitchen. Carlin has pulled some strings to get it inspected, so you'll be ready to be up and running as soon as you get here. Sounds good to me. What about that lawyer you mentioned? Is he still interested in meeting me? Grace wasn't sure how she felt about getting involved with a man as soon as she was out from under her father's roof, but Marcus sounded nice. Yes. I talked to him just today. He asked about you, hoping you'd be coming. Want me to invite you both to dinner on Monday? Grace thought about it for a moment. No, I want to get the bakery set up first. As soon as that's done, I'll meet him happily. Sounds good to me. I'm so happy you're coming. Me too. Grace ended the call and pushed the play button on her iPad, sighing contentedly. Who wouldn't be happy to watch Dylan kiss Joe? The couple had a chemistry that just made her heart beat faster. As she watched the scene she'd seen at least 15 times before, she thought about what they still had to do to get out of the house. Grace had talked to her parents about going to stay with the sisters, and her mother had reluctantly agreed. She didn't realize they weren't coming back, but that was better than just running off as her older quadruplet sisters had done. She and Honor were at least admitting what they were doing. Well, as much as they could without their parents going ballistic. She zoned out watching her show for a while, and then switched to watching some of the interviews of the stars on YouTube. She found one from a couple of months before where the two main stars appeared on the night show right after marrying in real life. She'd seen it before, but she still laughed and blushed when Valerie was asked very personal questions and ended up kissing her new husband, Jesse Savoy. It was too bad her sisters hadn't moved to Texas instead of Wyoming. She'd have loved to casually drive by the set and see if she could catch a glimpse of Valerie and Jesse. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, imagining having that kind of chemistry with a man. Someday it would happen for her. It had to. Asterisk. The drive to Wyoming was long and tedious. They took the car Grace and Honor's father had purchased for them when they'd begun college. All of Grace's baking pans and specialty equipment had been shipped ahead. As they crossed the state line into Wyoming on Sunday morning, Grace found herself becoming more and more nervous. Patience and Felicity sat in the back seat singing show tunes the whole way. It made Grace more than a little crazy, but their voices weren't horrible. It was just being locked up in a car for so long that was getting to her. When they started their fifth rendition of Moses Supposes His Toes Are Roses from Singing in the Rain, she thought about screaming, but instead she turned to Honor. Are you excited to be going to the ranch? I'm sure the brothers will let you help out. Honor shrugged. I'm more excited to finally be able to ride a horse. I still don't understand why Mom and Dad didn't want you taking horseback riding lessons when we were kids. Grace knew Honor had begged for the privilege, but her sister had never been allowed. Daddy would have been fine with it if I'd been willing to ride side saddle. But he said that riding astride wasn't something one of his daughters was going to do on his watch. That's stupid. Grace shook her head. Why do they have such antiquated beliefs? I have no idea. Honor rolled her eyes, turning left on a highway at the GPS system's prompting. How much longer does it say? Grace looked at the screen. 5 minutes. Patience and Felicity quit singing at her words. 5 minutes? Felicity asked. Patience let out a squeal. In 5 minutes, we can get out of this car and wander around. I can't wait to see the quads. Grace frowned. She knew everyone had always found it easier to refer to her older sisters as the quads and her and Honor as the twins, but she found it annoying. They weren't who they were because they happened to have been part of multiple births. They were people in their own right. As soon as Honor parked the car, Grace got out, stretching. This place is huge. Honor got out beside her, nodding emphatically. I want to go see the stables. She took off in the direction of a building that looked like a stable, ignoring her sister and cousins. Honor, where are you going? Grace yelled after her twin. We're supposed to meet the Culpeppers. Grace walked toward the house, tripping over her own 2 feet as she did all the time. She blamed her name. Her parents hadn't realized that giving her a name like Grace was just asking for her to be clumsy. Just like Chastity did everything she could to live down to her name, Grace found herself living down to her own, without intending to. A woman who appeared to be in her late 40s came out of the house, wearing a pair of jeans and a button-up shirt. "Hello," she called out. "Are you Grace?" Grace nodded, walking toward Linda Culpepper, their hostess. "Thank you for inviting us to stay for a while." Linda enfolded Grace in a hug. "We're just happy you're all willing to come and help us out of our jam. Family helps family. Joy said you were able to find a place for us to set up a bakery?" Grace was so excited to be able to use her skills. Back in Kentucky, she'd frequently made cakes and cupcakes for friends and family for birthdays and weddings, but she'd never been able to start a business using them, because their parents didn't think girls should work. "Yes, we do. We have a second bunkhouse that hasn't been used in about 10 years, but the kitchen is a commercial kitchen. My father-in-law sold off part of the ranch 10 years ago, so we didn't need as many men to run it. That's about the time the boys were finishing up their schooling, and now it's a family business. Only, if you don't count Angus. Angus works for you, right?" Grace asked, not having heard the name from her sisters. "He's our only employee. He's a good man." Linda led the 3 women into the house. "Who's missing?" "I thought I was getting 4 young ladies." "Honor went to check out the horses," Grace responded. "She's always been horse crazy." "Oh, so she rides?" Grace shook her head. "Not yet. I'm sure it's only a matter of time, though." Linda didn't ask any questions, obviously used to the crazy way the Quinlan girls had been raised. "Come on in. You'll each have your own room here in what we call the big house. I'm going to text your sisters to let them know you got here a little earlier than expected." "That would be great. Thank you." She quickly introduced her cousins, and they made their way down the hall, with Linda assigning a room to each of them. "I'm going to throw some lunch together. You girls come out when you're ready. Tomorrow morning, I'll show you the bakery." Grace took the first room to the right, sighing in relief once she was inside. It had a private bathroom, which thrilled her to no end. She quickly stripped and showered, not wanting to see her sisters when she was so unkempt after a 2-month absence. Of the 6 Quinlan sisters, Grace was known to be the most obsessed with her appearance. She dressed in jeans and a t-shirt before walking out into her bedroom. There was a sharp knock on her door, and then it was thrown open. "Joy." Grace ran into her sister's arms. For some reason, she'd always felt closer to Joy than she had any of the others, except Honor, of course. Joy grabbed her in a bear hug. "I'm so glad you're here. How are you feeling? How's my little niece or nephew?" Joy smiled. "Morning sickness is going to be the death of me. I can't believe I have 6 more weeks of this to look forward to." Grace frowned. "You're not due in 6 weeks. "No, but the doctor said it won't be this bad after the first trimester, and that's another 6 weeks. Well, I'm excited about the baby." Grace peered at her sister's stomach, trying to see if she was showing at all, but she couldn't see anything. "No, I'm not showing yet," Joy said with a frown. "Of course, as a newlywed, I don't want to be huge, but I do want this baby with everything in me. I can't believe you and Faith both got pregnant so quick." Oh, you'll understand once you meet our husbands. These Culpepper men are, well, I heard Dr. Lachelle tell Linda that her boys are all sex on a stick. And they are. Grace grinned at that. I'm sorry Dr. Lachelle isn't here so we could meet her. She'd wanted to meet the older woman since she'd heard about Dr. Lachelle's first meeting with her older sisters a few months before. Joy shrugged. Oh, she visits regularly. You'll see her. Why? Does she do that with all the couples she matches? I don't think so, but she and Linda have become really close. Joy grabbed Grace's arm and pulled her from the room. We need to go help with lunch. Linda is left with the burden of cooking for the entire horde too often. Grace happily joined her sister, going into the kitchen. Hope, Chastity, and Faith were all there, talking to Linda. Grace squealed when she saw her sisters, feeling like it had been years. She'd talked to Joy regularly, but not to any of the others. Hope was the first to spot Grace, and she opened her arms. Grace flew to her, like she'd been called home, surprising herself with tears. I've missed y'all so much. It was so hard at home without you four. Hope hugged her sister close. It was hard leaving you. I'm glad you joined us here. Their reunion was cut short by the back door opening. Four tall men walked into the house, stopping a few feet away from where she stood. One of them looked at Grace. Didn't I just see you outside poking around the stables? You were wearing something different. Grace grinned. That was my twin sister, Honor. Wait, you two are identical? Joy walked to the man and stood on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. This very rude man is my husband, Colby. Grace just grinned. We aren't identical, but if we dressed alike you'd have trouble telling us apart. We have the same coloring and the same facial features. Our eyes are identical. There are little ways to tell us apart, though, if you know them. As it is, you'll have no trouble. Honor will always be the one in jeans and a cowboy hat. I usually wear dresses. She didn't add that her sister never fixed her hair or wore makeup. Why point out the obvious? All four of the men frowned at her. How come no one told us you two looked so much alike? Another of them asked. Hope moved to the man who'd asked the second question. This one is my Carlin. Maybe someone could just introduce all four of them and get it over with too. Make it easier? Grace asked. Faith laughed. Well, you know those two. This is Cooper, and he's mine. And that one draped all over Chastity is her husband, Chris. Though they didn't let us see the wedding, so we just have to take their word for it. Thank you, Faith. Grace let her eyes move from one brother-in-law to the other, trying to remember who was whom. It's nice to meet all of you. The doorbell rang then, and Linda dried off her hands and headed to the door. Y'all, just keep talking. I'll be right back. Grace looked at Hope and Carlin, who were holding hands. So when do I get to see my new bakery? Mom said she wants to take you over tomorrow. I've had it inspected, and your sisters gave it a good cleaning. I've started the process of getting you ladies licensed as well, and that should be completed by Wednesday. You'll be up and running by the end of the week, Carlin informed her. Grace's eyes widened with surprise. I had no idea you'd been doing all that. Hope grinned. Well, we want you to be able to make money to help out. And we knew that's what you needed. Carlin's the mayor of Culpepper, so he pulled a few strings. Linda came to them then with a man beside her. He'd obviously just come from church and was wearing a suit with a cowboy hat. He removed the hat. "Excuse me. I didn't realize I'd be interrupting a big party." Joy smiled at him. "You're not interrupting, Marcus. I brought the wool back to you," Marcus said to Carlin. "Sorry I wasn't able to find a way out of your predicament, but there just isn't one." Carlin took the will, frowning. "I didn't think we'd find anything, but I appreciate you looking into it for us." Linda smiled at the newcomer. "Why don't you stay for lunch?" "I cooked a lot, because the girls just got here from Kentucky." Marcus looked around the room, only seeing one girl he hadn't already met. "I'm Marcus Wells." "Nice to meet you," Grace said with a smile, immediately knowing this was the man Joy wanted her to meet. "What do you call 40 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean?" Marcus's eyes narrowed. Was this the girl Joy had wanted him to meet? She was telling him lawyer jokes within seconds of meeting him? "I don't know." "A good start." Grace stifled a giggle. "I'm Grace, by the way." "I had a feeling you were." "Is the urge to tell lawyer jokes out of your system now?" She was beautiful. She couldn't be an inch over 5 feet, and she had blonde hair and the biggest blue eyes he'd ever seen. He wanted to ask her to go to dinner with him right away, but thought it might be too much, considering they'd just met. For the moment. She smiled, crooking her finger at him, so he leaned down. "I never run out of lawyer jokes, though." Marcus wanted to groan. "Great." Grace was surprised at the tall, handsome cowboy beside her. She'd expected someone who looked like he sat behind a desk all day and really hadn't been looking forward to meeting the man. Instead, she saw a man who obviously did some kind of physical work or at least spent a lot of time in a gym. "Maybe we could take a walk after lunch?" Marcus asked, wanting to get to know her better. "I've heard a lot about you from Joy." Grace nodded. "We could do that." "Do you mean walk here on the ranch? Or somewhere else?" She could see mountains out the window, and she desperately wanted to get closer, but she wasn't sure she was up to it after the long trip. She was tired. "Oh, just here on the ranch today. I'll show you around Culpepper soon if I don't run screaming from your lawyer jokes." "No one runs screaming from my lawyer jokes," she said with a wink. Joy was grinning between the two of them. "His grandfather is brother Anthony, the man who married all of us." Grace grinned, remembering what her sister had told her about the pastor. "Oh, I can't wait to meet him. Grandpa is interesting, all right." Marcus shook his head. Grace saw Patience and Felicity approaching, both fresh from showers. "Marcus, these are my cousins, Patience and Felicity. They're here to run the bakery with me." Marcus nodded politely, tipping his hat at both of them. "Nice to meet you, ladies." They were pretty enough, but for some reason, he was drawn to Grace in a way that surprised him. He didn't know if it was because Joy had suggested he take her to dinner once she arrived, and he'd been anticipating her arrival, or if he truly wasn't as attracted to them. Lunch proved to be a boisterous affair. Honor never did make an appearance, but Grace didn't worry about her. She knew her sister was content in the middle of the smelly stable. "What's the difference between an accountant and a lawyer?" Grace asked, taking a big bite of her potato salad. Marcus frowned at her. "This is going to happen on a regular basis, isn't it? An accountant knows he's boring." Grace nudged his foot with hers under the table, hoping he'd know she was teasing him. Marcus rolled his eyes as the four Culpepper men roared with laughter. "I like your sister," Cooper said to Faith. "She's always had this thing for lawyer jokes. Seriously, I think she was like 15 and she got a book of lawyer jokes. I don't know why they amused her so much, but she's been telling them for years," Faith responded. Marcus sighed. "So if I ask you out, I need to just expect lawyer jokes?" Grace nodded, her eyes lit with laughter. "They are kind of my thing." Duly noted. Marcus could see the way the Culpepper brothers were studying him interestedly. "What?" he finally asked. Carlin shrugged. "She's family now. I guess we're trying to figure out if you're worthy of walking with her after lunch." Grace's eyes widened. "I had enough of that at home. I can go right back. There if you men are going to start it here, because I'm my own woman, and I'll walk with a skunk after lunch if that's what I want to do." Carlin held his hands up. "I'm just trying to watch out for my kid sister." "Stop." Grace wasn't going to allow herself to be smothered ever again. She'd come to Wyoming for the opportunity to start her own business and stand on her own 2 feet. She didn't care if the 4 big galoots did think they were supposed to take care of her. Taking care of herself was her first priority. Marcus eyed her with a grin. He leaned close. "Good answer." She raised an eyebrow at him, letting him know she wouldn't put up with nonsense from him either. "I'm a strong woman. I'll prove it if it's the last thing I do." Grace needed to prove her strength as much as her sister Honor did, but she knew they'd go about it in different ways. Grace would want to prove herself strong of character. Honor wanted to prove she could do a man's job and do it as well as he could. Grace had never felt the need to prove herself that way. Thank heavens. Chapter 2. As soon as lunch was over, Grace stood to help with clearing the table. Faith shook her head at her. "You 4 are excused from household chores today. Settle in." Marcus stood beside the back door, watching her. "You ready?" Grace nodded. "Are these shoes okay? How far are we going?" She looked down at the sandals she wore. They'd be fine as long as they weren't walking miles and miles. I'd like to walk for an hour or so." "Will they work?" Marcus asked. He wanted time to get to know her, and he didn't want to have to cut their walk short because of her shoes when she could easily change before they left. "Let me go put some tennis shoes on." She hurried to the small room she was using and took off her sandals and exchanged them for socks and tennis shoes. Hurrying back into the dining room, she saw that Carlin was talking to Marcus. "No matter what she says, she's our sister now, and you'd better treat her right." Carlin's words floated across the room to her as she walked back to Marcus. "Carlin? You are my new brother, but I met you less than 2 hours ago. You will back off, and you will be nice about it." She stepped up to Marcus and smiled. "I'm ready." Marcus winked at Joy, who was watching carefully, before leading her sister out the back door. "So, tell me about Kentucky. I want to hear everything." "Oh, there's not a lot to tell. We grew up in a tiny little town near Paducah. Everyone knew everyone, and my sisters and I were a bit of a novelty because of the multiple thing, and because our parents were so strict." "They were strict?" Marcus asked, not having heard any of the story. "Very. I've never dated anyone in my life. Our father wouldn't allow it. In fact, we were allowed to go to college, but we were only allowed to major in homemaking. Honor and I quit after our freshman year." So what did you do back in Kentucky? Grace laughed. Do? Why, I made cakes for people for their birthdays and for weddings. And I sneaked into my room every chance I got and watched my favorite television show. Why did you have to sneak into your room to watch television? Because there was kissing on it. People aren't supposed to kiss before they get married, you know. Marcus blinked at her a couple of times before laughing. You're joking, right? She shook her head. Unfortunately, no. My parents were very strict in what we were allowed to watch. Mainly things like I Love Lucy. I see, he said, but he didn't. Not really. She was an adult. She should be able to watch whatever she wanted. What show did you watch? Lazy Love. The way she said it told him a whole lot about how she felt about the show. There was a bit of a sigh in her voice, as if she was absolutely mesmerized by it. I haven't seen it. Really? Oh, it's wonderful. It's about a girl who was raised by her rich father after her mother died. He had no idea what to do with her, so he sent her off to boarding school, and then to this really ritzy prestigious college. When he died, she had a 17-year-old sister to take care of, and she had no idea how to do it. She inherited his ranch and had to run it. And then she fell for her veterinarian, but she wouldn't marry him right off, because she needed to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. She identified with Joe more than she'd admit. Sounds like it could be interesting. I think they'll have them marry in the season finale. The 2 main characters just got married in real life, and she's already pregnant, so they'll have to address that. You follow the real life stars? Oh, did I say I watch the show? I mean, I'm addicted to the show. I watch all their interviews. I search the internet for pictures of them together. I watch every episode over and over until I have it memorized. He blinked a couple of times. Well, it sounds like something you enjoy. Seriously. The couple that's on it together is incredible. You watch one of their kissing scenes, and it's like the entire room they're in is on fire. You can almost see them spontaneously combust. But you don't believe in kissing before marriage. She laughed softly, looking at him out of the corner of her eye. My parents don't believe in kissing before marriage. Chastity had her first kiss under a table in Sunday school, when the quads were 2. And you? When was your first kiss? Marcus watched her carefully. He had planned to take her somewhere isolated and kiss her. See if there was anything between them. Now it looked like that might be out of the question. Oh, I'm afraid I was a good little girl. I've never had a boyfriend and never been kissed. So boring. Grace shrugged, trying to laugh it off. She couldn't, though. She felt like she was defective sometimes. So are you opposed to kissing before marriage, or no? Are you willing to watch it on television only? Or could I grab you and kiss you right now? Grace grinned at him. Are we out of eyesight of the house? Marcus looked over his shoulder. They'd been walking a straight line away from the main house on the Culpepper ranch. I think we're far enough away. Then let's walk for another 5 minutes, to be sure. She felt her heart start beating faster as they walked, knowing he'd be kissing her soon. What it was about him that made her want to dive into his arms, she didn't know. So that means you want to kiss me? She smiled. It means I'm attracted to you, and willing to give it a try. He laughed. I like your honesty. Thanks for not playing games. I wouldn't know how to play games. I've lived my life in a protective bubble that all but suffocated me. She frowned, not wanting to continue that line of conversation. What's the difference between a vacuum cleaner and a lawyer on a motorcycle? He thought he understood her game then. Anytime she became uncomfortable, she'd tell him a lawyer joke. She was an odd woman, but if it made her feel better, he'd play along. I don't know. What? The vacuum cleaner has the dirt bag on the inside. He grinned, reaching out and capturing her hand. How many of these jokes do you have? She shrugged, feeling electricity shoot through her body as his fingers intertwined with hers. Oh, an endless supply. He took them a little further to an isolated wooded area. He knew they were still on the Culpepper ranch, but he knew there was little chance they would be spotted there. May I kiss you? He asked softly, his eyes on hers. She stared up into his big brown eyes, her eyes memorizing every feature of his face, wanting to always remember how he'd looked at her the first time he kissed her. Nodding, she put her free hand onto his shoulder, frowning at how high she had to reach up. Why the frown? He asked softly, not wanting to do something she didn't want him to do. You're so much bigger than me. I feel like a tiny little porcelain doll. Like the kind Faith makes. He knew nothing about the kind of dolls Faith made, but if she wasn't frowning at the idea of kissing him, then he was going to go for it. He leaned down and gently pressed his lips to hers, his free hand cupping her face. As soon as Grace felt his lips on hers, she felt as if something inside her that had lain dormant came alive for the first time. She took a step closer to him, wanting to feel his body against hers. She felt like her favorite character, Joe, looked after she was kissed by Dylan. She pulled away for a moment to look up into his eyes. And now I understand why my daddy didn't want me kissing boys before I married. She stood on tiptoe, her body pressed against his as she pulled his head down for another kiss. Marcus felt as if his head was spinning. This tiny little woman was making him feel more than he'd imagined he could from a simple kiss. Finally, after a minute, he pulled away. I think we're compatible. She laughed. I have this feeling you're right. Wow. Wow. Yeah. That's all. Just wow. He slipped his arm around her shoulders to continue their walk, knowing he wouldn't be as tempted to grab her for another kiss if they were moving. So does that mean kissing is all you'd thought it would be? Let's just say you could give Dr. Dylan Drake a run for his money. And who is Dr. Dylan Drake? She'd lost him, and he had a feeling it wouldn't be the last time. He's the veterinarian the main character on my show is in love with. She sighed. You know, the one who she kisses, and the entire house is suddenly on fire, and no one even notices, because that's how hot their kisses are? I'm going to have to watch that show. Even if it wasn't his kind of show. At least he'd understand her a little bit better. I'd love to watch it with you. As soon as the words were out of her mouth, she was a bit worried. Would he think it was an invitation to make out with her? Because they were watching the stars of the show kiss? I'd love that. He grinned at her, continuing their walk, but not telling her where he was taking her. The small ranch he owned was just on the other side of the Culpeppers, and they should be able to get there in another 30 minutes or so. He'd left his truck, but they could take his motorcycle back, and he could bring that home in his truck bed. Besides, he wasn't dressed for walking. He wanted to get into jeans and a comfortable shirt. Shouldn't we turn back? She asked. He shook his head. No, I want to show you something, and it's just a bit further. All right. You're not going to ask what I want to show you, he asked, surprised. She shrugged. I trust you. Joy said you were a good guy. And you trust your sister. Marcus was able to just see his house beyond the trees. There was a fence dividing the properties, but he had climbed through it many times. Never in a suit, but they could do it. He walked to the fence and held the barbed wire apart. After you. Are we allowed to go there? She asked, surprised. He nodded. That's my property. It's fine. She shrugged and climbed between the wires on the fence, before carefully taking them to hold them apart for him. Wait. Give me your jacket. He nodded, taking off his suit coat and handing it to her. She looked at the fence and then at the coat in her hands, before shrugging it on, before pushing the sleeves up to her elbows so she wouldn't snag them when she held the wires of the fence apart for him again. He quickly climbed through the fence and waited for her to offer his coat back, but when she didn't, he shrugged. Grace took his hand again, not needing his coat for warmth, but liking the feel of it fresh from his skin. It felt cozy, and it smelled like he did. Why are we going to your house? She asked, walking in the direction of the big white house in front of them. Because I took you so far, we were closer to my house than the Culpeppers. Thought it might be nice to show you around, and I'll take you home. On my motorcycle. I can put it in the bed of the truck and drive it back. Motorcycle? Grace asked, her eyes wide. Her parents had always been dead set against motorcycles, so naturally she was fascinated by them. He nodded. Do you mind? She shook her head, loving the idea. I'd like to see your house too. Make sure you're a good housekeeper and all that. He laughed. I don't keep my own house. One of my grandmother's best friends, Ethel, lost her husband a few years back, and she had no way to support herself, so I offered her a job as my housekeeper and cook. Oh. Grace wasn't sure if she was relieved or disappointed he had a housekeeper. Does she live in? He nodded. She's probably out right now, but she lives in. She usually spends Sunday afternoons with her grandkids. Her heart beat a bit faster at his words. She would be totally alone with a man she'd just met hours before. If her parents could see her, they'd shoot her, but they were in Kentucky, and she was in Wyoming. They certainly couldn't reach that far. Will it bother you to be alone with me? He asked. I didn't think it was different than being in the woods together, but if it bothers you, just tell me, and I'll go in and change and take you back. Grace shook her head. It would bother my parents a lot, but it doesn't bother me. Good. He smiled at her for a moment, stopping walking. I really want you to see my place. Why? He shrugged. I'm not sure. I guess I want our relationship to be able to move quickly. She frowned. How quickly? I'm okay with kissing before marriage, but not more than that. I gathered that. I won't press for anything more before marriage. I promise. I appreciate that. He walked to the front door and opened it wide, letting her precede him into the house. I didn't know you were going to already be at the ranch today. I hope you didn't think I came over to force a meeting before you were ready. She shook her head. Not at all. I'm glad we met as soon as I got to town. I'm very glad to meet you. That's the name I'm going to have the grandkids call me. All 57 of them. Grace's eyes widened. 57? From 4 girls? Linda shrugged. Well, I'll adopt you in honor, of course, and I'm sure. Felicity and Patience. Grace nodded. That's still only 8 girls. That would be more than 7 kids each. That's not too much to ask, is it? Linda winked at Grace to let her know. She was joking. At least that's what Grace hoped it meant. I guess not. Linda laughed. I'm kidding. Mostly. She got up and cleared the table. Grace watched her as she ate the last bite. You cooked. You should leave. The dish is for me. Linda shook her head. No, I'll do them. You just got here and then you spent all day wandering around. You can help tomorrow. I'm really excited to get to spend time organizing the bakery tomorrow. Thanks for helping make my dreams come true. You girls will be helping us a lot with that bakery. We appreciate the time going into it. The arrangement Hope made with us was more than generous. They would work until the men's deadline free of charge, and in exchange, they would be able to work out of the bunkhouse's kitchen free of charge for 5 years as they built up their business. As long as you're satisfied with it, I'm sure it will work out well. Linda turned to Grace from the dishwasher she'd been loading. I almost forgot. A friend's daughter is having a baby. The shower is on Saturday. We were hoping you would be willing to bake the cake. I'd love to. Oh, good, because I told her you would. Linda turned back to loading the dishwasher, missing the amused look on Grace's face. Grace stood and stretched, taking her plate and throwing it away. I think I'm going to go and vegetate before I fall asleep. Linda looked at her with a smile. What kind of vegetating? That reminds me. Do you have a Wi-Fi password? Yes, of course. I need it if you don't mind. I'll rewatch old episodes of my favorite show. It makes me happy. What show do you watch? Linda asked. Lazy Love. Grace took the paper Linda handed her. I'll be right back with it. I need to key it into my iPad. She hurried into her room and set up the Wi-Fi. Before returning the paper to Linda. I'll see you in the morning. We usually have breakfast before the kids start coming around 6:30. Linda informed her. Do you want me to cook? Linda shook her head. No, you'll be working all day. There's no need. Grace smiled. Thank you so much. I feel like I've moved to a luxury resort. We Quinlan girls are used to doing for ourselves. I know you are. That's why I like to make it special for you when you come. Here. Linda hugged Grace tightly. I'm glad you're here. Now go vegetate with your show. Good night. Sleep sweet. Grace smiled as she walked away. She'd never heard anyone use that phrase before, but she really liked it. Sleep sweet. She might just have to adopt that. She wandered into her new room and changed into her pajamas. After she'd brushed her teeth, she settled into bed with her iPad, bringing up the first episode of Lazy Love. New life for her, so what better time to start over at the beginning? With the show she loved. She sighed happily. She was going to love Wyoming. Before long she was lost in the storyline, giggling at the stupid things Joe did as a newcomer to the ranch, and sighing over her chemistry with Dr. Dylan Drake. When she slept that night, she didn't dream about Dr. Drake, though. No, it was a dark-haired lawyer who had captured her attention, filling her Chapter 4. Linda led Grace, Patience, and Felicity into the old bunkhouse an hour later. "We brought all of your boxes over, but we didn't unpack them. We thought you'd want to do that yourself." "Thank you for making sure they got here," Grace said, speaking for all of them. Her cousins were sweet, but they tended to prefer if other people did the talking for them. "You'll have to tell us where the nearest warehouse store is. We'll need to go and stock up on flour and sugar, as well as the millions of other things we'll need." Linda smiled. "I'm going to leave you girls to it. I'll find the location of the nearest store, but it's going to be a drive." Grace shrugged. "As long as we have today out of the car, we'll be able to manage driving again tomorrow. We may not like it, but we're tough. Let me know if you need me." Linda left to go back to help with the daycare. Grace looked around the kitchen. There were 2 huge commercial-size ovens and a separate 6-burner stove. A walk-in freezer and a separate walk-in refrigerator and a long stainless steel table filled the room. "I think this is going to work." Patience wandered around, opening every drawer. "There's nothing left here, so it's just what we brought with us." Felicity nodded. "But we brought and sent ahead a ton of stuff. We'll be able to work for a while without buying any new supplies as long as we have our ingredients." Grace took one of the boxes and started unpacking it. "I think we should sanitize everything after shipping it, so let's get started." Felicity wrinkled her nose. "I know you're right, but I sure don't want you to be. What we want and what we get are frequently different. I'd like the kitchen set up by late afternoon, so I can get ready for my date this evening." Patience grinned at Grace. "You like the lawyer?" Grace grinned, a faraway look on her face. "I do. He's a nice man and a good sport." "How many lawyer jokes did you tell him?" Felicity asked as she opened the huge dishwasher and started loading things the other 2 were removing from the boxes. "Oh, not more than 10, Grace said, giggling softly. Patience shook her head. "Only you, Grace." Asterisk. By the time Marcus arrived that evening, Grace had showered for the second time that day and had her long blonde hair styled and hanging around her shoulders. Her makeup was done to perfection, and she was wearing a loose skirt and a nice blouse. It was her first real date, and she was excited. Marcus came to the door, and Grace opened it, her eyes traveling up and down his body. He was wearing a pair of tight jeans and a button-up shirt. He was holding a motorcycle helmet in each hand. Grace took the helmet from him, grinning. "I love your motorcycle." She wasn't sure if she loved it because it was fun, or because she knew her parents would have a fit if they knew about it. As rebellions went, it was a small one for an almost 21-year-old, but it made her so happy. He smiled. "Do you want to go for a ride before we go to my house?" She debated for only a moment. "Yes, if you don't mind." He shook his head. "I'll take you closer to the mountains. No use living in the most beautiful place on earth if you never get close enough to see what makes it so special." She frowned for a moment. There were no pockets in her skirt, and she didn't want to have to take her purse on his motorcycle, so she carefully tucked her phone into her bra so she'd have it if she needed it. He gave her a bemused look before shaking his head. "Do you always keep your phone there?" She shrugged, blushing a little. "Only when necessary." Turning back to the kitchen, she called, "I'll be back before too terribly late. Have a good time." Linda called back. Grace followed him out to his motorcycle, frowning for a moment. How was she supposed to ride that thing in her skirt? She waited while he got on it, and then threw one leg over, keeping her skirts wrapped tightly around her legs. She put her arms around his waist and held on for dear life as he started the bike and roared out of the driveway. He took them straight toward the mountains, and she was mesmerized by the way the sun was dancing down behind them. She looked at everything around her with wide eyes. The flowers were fully in bloom, and when they crossed a bridge over a river, she wondered if that was the same river Joy had once called her from. It was so beautiful, but she wasn't sure if she was more fascinated by the beautiful scenery or the man she had her arms around so tightly. Finally, after about 30 minutes, he pulled to the side of the road. Look at that sunset, he said softly, pointing toward the mountains looming in front of them. She took a picture of the sun as it was sinking below the mountains, taking a second to tweet it. The sunset near my new home. Hello, Wyoming. #LazyLove. After she'd typed in the hashtag, she frowned, but then shrugged. She was really only talking to fellow LLers anyway, so what did it matter? Marcus watched her intently while she messed with her phone, his eyes memorizing her face. She was so beautiful. Living in a town filled with cowboys. She wasn't going to be single for long. He cupped her face with one hand and lowered his lips to hers. Hi. She grinned. Hi. She wasn't sure if she was happy or sad that he hadn't greeted her that way when he'd first arrived at the ranch. How was your day? Long. I thought of you a lot. She blushed at that. I thought of you too. What did you think of me? He asked, curious. He'd had some pretty hot fantasies about her already, but he wouldn't be telling her that. Grace blushed even redder. I thought about how good it feels when you kiss me, she admitted. So you like kissing? With you, I do. He smiled at that. Let's get back to my house then, and we can do lots more kissing. Sounds good to me. Besides, I'm hungry. She'd had time for a sandwich at lunch, but that had been many hours before Ethel cooked. I don't know if she'll eat with us or not, but she's always welcome. That was non-negotiable for him. His housekeeper was more of another grandmother to him, and he wouldn't have any woman treating her rudely. That's fine. I'm not used to being alone with men anyway. I'm not just any man, though, right? He asked, his eyes twinkling at her. You're not? He shook his head. I'm the first man you've ever kissed. I guess you'll have to marry me. Her heart jumped into her throat at his words. I guess I will, she quipped back, trying to make light of it. He turned around and drove them back to his house, parking his bike out front. He helped her off, and she handed him the helmet. She frowned when it was time to take it off. I'm going to have hat hair. He laughed. You'll be just as lovely in my eyes. I promise. She sighed. It wouldn't do to tell him she wasn't usually vain, because as he got to know her, he'd realize that wasn't true. She always tried to look as ladylike as possible, but it just wasn't possible when you were taking a helmet off. Maybe I'll just keep it on. He reached out and unfastened her helmet for her, pulling it off her head. Her hair was flattened where the helmet had been, giving her a silly look. You're still beautiful to me. He leaned down and brushed his lips across hers. Let's eat. Taking her hand, he led her into the house, calling out for Ethel as he walked in. "We're here." Ethel, a woman of indeterminate age and silver hair, popped her head around the corner. "Well, it's about time. You two take a detour to Cheyenne on the way? I expected you an hour ago." Marcus smiled at the older woman, used to her complaining. "Oh, Ethel, she hadn't seen the mountains yet. I had to take her to see the sunset." Ethel shook her head with a long-suffering sigh. "I suppose you did have to take her, but you should have called first. I know your mama taught you better manners than that." "Yes'm, she did. I'm so sorry. I'll remember next time." "You'd better." She shook the spatula in her hand at him. "Go wash up. I'll put supper on the table." Marcus pointed out a bathroom for Grace to use before taking the stairs too. At a time. When he got back to the table, she was sitting quietly looking at her phone, her fingers flying. "Who are you talking to now?" She grinned at him. "The star of my show, Valerie Savoy, saw my picture of the sunset on Twitter. She wants to know where I took it." "Did you tell her that Culpepper is the most beautiful place on earth?" he asked. She nodded. "I just did." "You're a smart woman." Ethel brought the food in. "Now, I wasn't about to let my supper go to ruin by waiting for you two, not knowing when your shenanigans would bring you home, so I ate earlier. Put the dishes in the sink, and I'll wash them in the morning." She looked at Grace, wagging her finger in her face. "And if you think you're being a good person by washing them for me, you can think again, little missy. My kitchen, my dishes. You hear?" Grace nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes were wide as she watched the woman walk back toward the kitchen. "Is she always like that?" She dropped her voice to a whisper, not wanting the old harridan to hear. Marcus nodded. "Isn't she awesome?" Grace giggled softly. "She is. I think I love her." "Don't let her hear you say that. She'll get even worse." "I won't." She took a bite of the chicken and dumplings the woman had prepared for them. "These are delicious." Marcus nodded, sighing contentedly. "She's a wonderful cook. She has a hard time cleaning the upstairs because of her knees, but she does everything else to perfection. I'm so glad to have her here." After they finished eating, Grace put the dishes into the sink, not daring to do anything more than rinse them off. Then she hurried into the living room to join Marcus on the couch. "What are we watching on?" she asked. He nodded to the television mounted on the wall. "It's a smart TV. We can watch Netflix on it." He turned the object in question on with his remote, and quickly navigated the menu. "Lazy Love, right?" "Yes. I sure hope you like it as much as I do." He pulled up the first episode, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "Just so we get to watch it together." The first scene, one she'd watched just the night before for the umpteenth time, had her stomach filled with butterflies. She desperately wanted him to like her show. The scene showed Joe receiving a phone call in the middle of her English class at a prestigious all-women's college in the East. She left the room to take the call, and whatever she heard had her dropping her phone and leaning back against the wall in defeat. Then came the opening credits, and she smiled as she watched the different actors' faces flash on the screen. First Valerie Dobson as Joe Larson. Second was Jessie Savoy as Dr. Dylan Drake. And then Amber Knight as Mary Beth Larson. All The names were as familiar to Grace as those of her own sisters. Marcus looked down at Grace, smiling at how excited she looked with the show on his television. So far, it looked boring to him, but he didn't care. It would give them something to do together, and during a movie was always a good time to kiss a girl. The next scene showed Jo back in Texas on the ranch where she'd lived until her mother died when she was 5. She'd then been shipped off to boarding school, only spending summers with her father and sister, who was 5 years younger. It came out as the story went on that her mother had died of an infection she'd gotten during childbirth. Mary Beth was home from her own boarding school, and none too happy with living under her sister's roof. Dr. Dylan Drake met both sisters at the funeral. He took Jo's hands into his. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Miss Larson." "It's not a loss when you don't know the man being buried," she'd responded with her typical bluntness. Dr. Drake had nodded. "I'm sorry for that loss as well then. I'm Dr. Dylan Drake, the local veterinarian. I'm sure I'll be seeing a lot of you then, Dr. Drake." Bob, the ranch's foreman, stood right behind Jo. "I'll alert you if you're needed, Dr. Drake. The family is thankful for your willingness to help." The man's eyes met Dylan's as he made it clear he had no intention of letting him swoop in and marry the beautiful woman in front of them. "I'll be around regardless. No need for Miss Larson to have to learn about how to take care of all of the animals without help." As Dylan walked out of the room, Marcus paused the show. "Okay, now. Which one is she married to in real life?" "It's one of those two, right? Do you want me to tell you, or do you want to figure it out on your own?" "Well, I think it was the veterinarian guy. He's the one she seems to have some real chemistry with." He brought her fingers to his lips, thinking how much his chemistry with Grace reminded him of the chemistry on screen. "You're right. He's Jesse Savoy." The credits for the last 3 episodes have changed the heroine's name to Valerie Savoy. Wait, I might have read something about that one day. There was a headline about some actress dumping her boyfriend and marrying her co-star the same day. Valerie the Virgin? Am I right? Yes. That's them. Valerie Dobson was called Valerie the Virgin before she married Jesse Savoy. And her ex-boyfriend has just been sentenced to 30 years in prison. I think it was a plea bargain or something. Rumor has it he kidnapped her sister, but I'm not sure if that's true. Marcus frowned. "I think I read about that too." "That's this show?" She nodded emphatically. "And Valerie is the one who was messaging me on Twitter a little while ago." "She really tweets with fans?" "Yes. That's part of what I find so incredible about the show. The fans and stars tweet live while the show is happening too." Jesse wasn't always involved in the Twitter parties before they married, but now he never misses an episode. And they usually take a selfie of the two of them sitting there with their phones tweeting away. They're always holding hands, or she's in his lap or something. She sighed. "What? You want to be in his lap?" "Not at all. I just want someone to look at me the way Jesse looks at Valerie." She shrugged. "There's this great clip from them on the night show. It's so obvious that neither of them are acting, and their feelings are real." Matt Winters, the host, actually looks at Jesse and says, "You get paid for that," after this incredible kissing scene. Marcus noted what she was saying. She wanted to be loved the way the stars of her show loved each other. He could start studying how they acted in their interviews and recreate it. He may be only a lawyer, but he could show this sweet girl the kind of romance she was craving. It wouldn't kill him. By the time the show was over, she was yawning. I'm sorry. We're working long days to get the bakery up and running as soon as possible. He nodded. I understand. I hate to add to your tiredness. Why don't I take you home? She frowned, turning her face into his shoulder. I'm not ready to leave you. Yet. Marcus smiled at that. I appreciate the sentiment, but you need sleep. We can do this again tomorrow night. She smiled at that. Well, in that case. He put one finger under her chin and turned her face up to his for a kiss. I need at least one good kiss before I can take you home, though. Grace sighed. I was afraid you were going to forget all about kissing me. How could I do that when it's all I've thought about all day? Of course. He'd thought about doing a whole lot more than kissing her, but he wasn't going to discuss where his thoughts had really gone. She was too innocent to hear all that from him. She lifted her lips for his kiss, one hand flattening against the front of his shirt, while the other went to the back of his neck to toy with the curls there. When his lips came down on hers, she felt her heart skip a beat. Oh, how he got her heart racing when he kissed her. His arms closed around her, pulling her closer toward him. He wanted to pull her onto his lap, but he knew that would be a bit much. No, he'd have to content himself with holding her against him. Her lips fluttered beneath his, responding to his. He traced the seam of her lips with his tongue, demanding entrance. Open for me. Grace got onto her knees on the couch beside him, pressing even closer. When he started to kiss her this way, she could think of nothing but getting closer to him and touching him. The hand at the front of his shirt rubbed up and down his chest, feeling his hard muscles beneath the fabric of his shirt. Finally, he pulled back, taking big gulps of air. For someone who was never kissed before yesterday, you're awfully good at it. She giggled. Why, thank you. She'd never once in her life considered she would think that was a compliment, but here she was, loving every kiss. Was she more like chastity than she'd realized? We have to get out of here. I'm too tempted to carry you up the stairs to my bed right now. That would not be a good idea at all. She sighed. Oh, I think it sounds like a fine idea, but I also think that I would hate myself forever if we did that before I had a ring on my finger. He nodded, sighing. And we're talking a wedding ring, not engagement. Ring, right? He knew the answer, but he clarified anyway. He wanted to make sure they were on the same page about everything. She nodded. I was taught that an engagement ring means it's okay to hold hands. Not even time to kiss yet. All right. I may have to think about this a bit. Think about what? She was still a bit too bemused from his kisses to be able to concentrate on what he was saying. About putting a wedding ring on that finger. She stared at him, her eyes wide. We've known each other for less than 36 hours. Marcus shrugged. How long do you think it took Joe and Dylan to know they belonged together? I think he knew the instant their eyes met. She may have taken a little longer. Grace wasn't sure if he meant on the show or in real life, but with those two the answer seemed to be the same. Their chemistry together was too strong for it to be any other way. He stood up. Let's go. We'll take my truck this time. No reason for you to have to climb on my bike with your skirt again. Oh, it wasn't so bad. I'm used to doing everything I need to do in a skirt. Did you not wear pants at home? He asked, leading her toward the front of the house where his truck was parked. She shook her head. Not very often. My parents thought girls should wear skirts at all times, because pants tempt men to do things they shouldn't. A girl should always be covered as much as possible. You know that's a bunch of hogwash, right? She laughed. I always suspected it was. Thank you for confirming it for me. He opened the truck door and waited as she got in before running around to the other side. What time tomorrow night? He asked. I'm working from home tomorrow, so I'll be available after 5 or so. She frowned, unsure how long the trip into town for supplies would take. We're shopping tomorrow for supplies for the bakery. Why don't I text you when we're home and I can get away? I can't leave my cousins to do all the work. Of course, you can't. I'd never ask you to. Good. Give me your number, and I'll text as soon as I'm ready. He rattled off his number as he pulled into Linda Culpepper's driveway. He parked the truck and unbuckled her seatbelt, pulling her across the seat to him. One more kiss, and then I'll go on my merry way. She offered her lips to him sweetly. I'm already ready for the days when we won't have to kiss goodnight in your truck. She knew she was probably being too forward, at least her mother would have said so, but sometimes she needed to say what was on her mind. He grinned at that. Well, Miss Grace, hopefully those days will be over real soon. Grace smiled as she opened the door, getting down out of the truck. You might need to install a step on my side. It's a big climb for a girl like me. He laughed. I'll do just that. Good night, Grace. Good night, Marcus. She turned and hurried into the house, looking back over her shoulder one last time before opening the door. Chapter 5. Grace woke the next morning with a smile on her lips. She could still feel how good Marcus's lips felt against hers. She couldn't wait to spend more time with him, and they had agreed to get together that evening. She groaned as she rolled out of bed, thinking about all the things she needed to get done before she would have that privilege. After a quick shower, she hurried into the kitchen to have breakfast. It was just her and Honor again, and she smiled at her twin. Where is everyone? Honor shrugged. Linda made breakfast, but said she had a couple of things to prepare for the kids today. The other two aren't up yet. Patience and Felicity aren't exactly morning people. They'll have to learn to be if they want to run a successful bakery. Grace said, sipping her juice. I had dinner with my Marcus last night. Your Marcus? I think I saw you two walking across the yard together on Sunday. It's hard to believe we've only been here 2 days. Honor shook her head. So much has happened in such a short time. What do you think of the horses? Horses? Oh, they're awesome. I'm in love already. Honor seemed a bit distracted to Grace. How about you? I heard you went on a walk with your lawyer man. Grace grinned. Well, I wouldn't say he's my lawyer man yet. Tell me you didn't tell him any of your stupid lawyer jokes. Grace bit her lip to stifle a giggle. 1 or 2. Or 50. Honor shook her head. And they say you're the practical twin. Grace shrugged. Maybe I'm tired of being the practical twin. Time to live dangerously for a change. Honor studied Grace over the top of her coffee cup. Did he kiss you? Grace looked around. Linda had wandered off somewhere, and their cousins hadn't come to breakfast yet. Yes. And? Did you like it? Grace sighed, knowing her eyes were sparkling. Kissing is better than lazy love. She knew her twin would get the impact of her words. Honor stared at her sister in disbelief for a moment before throwing her head back and laughing. You're a goner. Have you talked wedding yet? No. We just met Sunday. He'd never seen Lazy Love, so I had to introduce him. Honor rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Of course you did. Because everyone on the planet needs to love that silly show just as much as you do. Grace shrugged. Well, it would be nice. It's the best show on television. After all. You just keep thinking that. Honor looked around to see who was there. What else did you do? Did you have a good time? We had a marvelous time. We walked across the ranch over to his house, which is on the other side of the woods. It's so beautiful here. I don't ever want to leave. Just don't tell Mom and Dad that when you call, and we'll be good. I don't want them to realize we're not coming back until we're at least 73. 73? Why 73? Not sure. Honor shrugged. Just seems like a good age, doesn't it? Sure. Grace reached out and squeezed her sister's hand. I hope you have a great day today. Are y'all going to work on setting up the bakery? Grace nodded. We have our first order. A baby shower cake. I hope word gets out fast. From what I hear, they need a lot of money. Who've you been talking to? Angus. How did the lawyer like your silly show? You can't call it silly unless you've seen it. Grace stuck her tongue out at her twin. She was still wearing her pajamas, and they looked very much alike in that moment. Neither had done the things that made them different. Honor wasn't wearing her boy clothes, and Grace hadn't yet put on her makeup or fixed her hair. They deliberately emphasized their differences, and had for years, because they were sick of being seen as a matching set of salt and pepper shakers. Fine. Your potentially silly show. Is that better? Grace wrinkled her nose. I guess it's better. I think he liked it. Or else he's just tolerating it for me. Either way, he sounds like a good guy. I'm glad you like him. For someone I felt obligated to date at least once, he's pretty terrific. We're going to see each other again tonight. He's already mentioning rings. Oh, well. Dad would have a fit. Honor shook her head. I wonder how they'll react when they realize we're all moving here. Grace sighed. I don't even want to think about it, to be honest with you. Dad will probably blame Mom for not taking us more in hand. Whatever. Grace hated the idea of making things harder on their mother, but she couldn't live under those conditions for another minute. She had the right to live her life as she saw fit. As long as she didn't break God's laws. And not the made-up laws that people attributed to God either. I guess it's not something we can worry about. She jumped up. I need to get dressed, so I can go spend my day with the horses. Honor shrugged, popping the last of her toast into her mouth in one huge bite. She was gone before Grace had a chance to ask any more questions. Grace watched her go with a grin, wishing she could be more like Honor at times, but knowing it would only make Honor behave even more extreme so that they could still be as different as possible. She understood why Honor wanted to be an individual, but it still sometimes hurt that she didn't want to be anything like her. They had to make a long drive into Cheyenne to go to a warehouse store, which would take a good half of the day. By the time they had everything put away, and prepped for their first day open, there would be little time for anything else. Before Marcus came to pick her up, she finished her breakfast, put her plate in the dishwasher, and went to check on her cousins. If they were going to have a full day, they needed to start it early. 6 hours later, Grace and her cousins were back from Cheyenne and unloading the SUV they'd borrowed from Hope. Grace was twitching slightly from all of the show tunes her cousins had sung on the trip. Didn't the girls know any songs other than show tunes? Grace was a fan, but not for hours straight. She wanted to kill someone. Each of them had claimed a small workstation of their own for decorating. Grace set hers up with a smile, putting her tubes and food colorings in a logical order so she could get to them when she wanted. She was still a bit mystified about how they'd advertise, but Linda kept assuring her that as long as she made cakes, people would buy them. In a small town like Culpepper, you don't have to advertise, Linda assured her. It's a lot harder to hide what you're doing than it is to broadcast it. By the time they'd finished putting everything where they wanted it, and getting the bakery ready to start working in, it was after 4:30. Grace hurried back to the big house and rushed through her shower. She couldn't see Marcus, with the flour that had formed a light powder over her body as they had transferred it from the huge bags to the plastic bins they'd purchased to store it in. She dressed in jeans instead of a dress, worried he might bring his motorcycle again, and she didn't want to feel uncomfortable with how she was dressed. After she'd finished her show and was dressed and ready, she texted him. "Ready when you are. Did you have a good day?" "I don't know about good, but it was productive. Be there in 10 minutes. Linda smiled. "You and your sisters. You get out from under your parents' thumbs and go wild." Grace frowned at that. "Does it seem like I'm going wild?" "We're not doing anything wrong. Just spending time together. He's never even touched me inappropriately." Linda shook her head. "Grace, it's okay. You're a big girl. I'm not your mother. But I don't want to do something that even gives the appearance of being wrong. Do you think I should take one of the other girls as a chaperone?" "No, I don't. I think what you're doing is fine. I'm sorry if I made it seem like you were doing wrong, because I really don't think so." Linda hugged Grace. "Go and have a wonderful time." Grace nodded, still unsure about how she should act with Marcus. Maybe she was being too forward by going to his house with him every night. Maybe she should tell him that she couldn't spend any more time alone with him until they were married. She knew most people didn't feel those things were necessary, but she had been raised to believe they were. The knock came at the door then, and Grace hurried toward it. "I won't be too late," she called back to Linda. "Just enjoy yourself." Grace opened the door and smiled. Marcus stood there, leaning against the door jamb, looking sexier than any man had a right to look. The look in his eyes made her feel weak in the knees. "Hi you." The grin that spread across his face did nothing for the state of her knees. "Hi." He took her hand, leading her out to his truck. "Did you get a lot done today?" She nodded, running her hand over the back of her neck, surprised at the tension she felt as a result of one teasing comment. "We did. The bakery is all ready to start tomorrow." "Wow. You girls are sure moving fast." He didn't bother to start the truck, and instead pulled her toward him. "I missed your kisses today." She wrapped her arms around his neck, drawing his head down for a kiss. "I missed yours too." How could a man's kisses be so addictive? He always had a very distinct taste to him. Kind of orangey. How did he do that? After a moment, he pulled back and started the truck, driving out onto the highway. If we're going to keep doing this, we need to build a road between the Culpepper's house and mine. It would take less than half the time if I could just drive straight and not go in a big U. She shrugged. Probably. Her mind was back on what Linda had said. He expected her to kiss him as soon as they were alone. How long would that last? Before he'd expect more? No wonder her mother had said to save kissing for marriage. You all right? He asked, surprised that she seemed so moody. She was normally very even-tempered. He thought about asking if it was that time of the month, but thought better of it. A girl had threatened him with a steak knife for that once. She nodded. Just thinking. Want to talk about it? Whatever it was, he wanted things out in the open. With her. You know how I was raised. We've talked about it. At his nod, she continued. Linda made an innocent comment a few minutes ago about how when my sisters and I get away from our parents, we go nuts. It's got me thinking. Maybe spending so much time together isn't a good idea. Marcus frowned. Is that how you really feel? Or is that how your parents would feel? Well, it's definitely how my parents would feel. I guess I've always kind of believed it too. More than any of my sisters did anyway. I didn't drink all the Kool-Aid. Only half a jug. I like spending time with you, and I don't think kissing before marriage is wrong, but we sure are putting ourselves into a situation where temptation could be very easy. He pulled into his driveway before turning to her. Ethel is out for the evening. It's just going to be us. If you don't want to be totally alone, I can take you into town for dinner. There's not much there, but I'd be happy to go. I know you think I'm being silly, and I probably am, but old habits die hard. I know they do. He took her hand and folded it in his big one. I wasn't raised like you are. My grandfather is a minister, and he sure preaches sex before marriage is wrong, but he sees nothing wrong with kissing before marriage. I honestly didn't know anyone thought that was wrong until a few years ago. That's because you've never met my parents. She sighed. I don't want to disappoint you, but I don't want to disappoint them either. So if we decided to get married on Saturday, would you feel right about spending this evening alone with me? She shrugged. I don't know. I guess I'd be a little less worried. Not as much time for things to explode in our faces. I bought you a ring today, he said. He hadn't planned on blurting it out, but he wanted to get it out in the open. I was planning to ask you while we were eating dinner. I'm not even sure how to react to that. She stared at him, her eyes wide. You really went out and bought me a ring today? He nodded. I did. I was planning to ask you, but I was going to wait for a few hours. I can still ask you at dinner if you want. I can make it nice and pretty for you. She shook her head. I don't need a big formal proposal. I guess I'd prefer you not get down on one knee and say, let's get hitched, but just a simple proposal is fine. But you want me to propose? He asked. She nodded. Yeah, that'd be really nice. He grinned. Then I'll do it over dinner as I planned. Pretend to be surprised. Would you? I thought about this a lot. I'll do my best. They got out of the truck and went inside. Ethel had left chicken spaghetti and garlic bread warming in the oven. There was a salad waiting on the counter. Grace shooed Marcus from the kitchen while she served it. When she walked into the dining room to join him, he had the lights dimmed and 2 candles lit the small room. She smiled at him. He really had planned to make it a romantic meal. She set both plates on the table before taking her seat. "This looks delicious." He nodded. "You're going to be all right with Ethel staying on after we marry, right? You won't feel the need to take over all the cooking?" He worried about the old woman who was so close to his grandmother. He didn't know where she'd go if she didn't get to stay there. "Of course. It's not my purpose in life to completely change yours." She took a bite of the spaghetti. "And she's a very good cook." He grinned. "I think so too." She had just pushed her plate away when he took her hand. "Grace." She looked back at him, knowing this was probably the moment he'd been working at building toward. "Yes? Will you do me the honor of sharing your life with me?" She smiled at the way he'd worded his question. He wasn't just asking her to marry him, he wanted her to share his life. "Yes, I would be thrilled." He pressed a kiss to her hand before sliding a ring onto her finger. "I hope I got the right size." "I had Joy ask Honor." She nodded, staring down at the ring with the tiny diamond. Her eyes lit up. "It's beautiful. You really like it?" "I just thought that one suited you best." "I love it. You did good." "I considered asking Joy to go with me, but I didn't want a Culpepper fist through my face." Grace grinned. "You and Colby don't get along?" He shrugged. "Honestly, I don't have a problem with any of them. Chris was something of a rival in high school, but that's water under the bridge at this point." She leaned toward him, brushing her lips lightly across his. "Do you really want to marry on Saturday?" she asked. "Oh, if it were up to me, we'd get married tonight. I guess I can wait until Saturday." She laughed. "I'd like to have time to bake us a wedding cake at least." "I never thought of that." "It makes sense that would be important to you." He stood from the table and led her to the living room by her hand. "Want to sit on the couch and smooch while we watch your show?" "Sounds divine." "I need to get the dishes in the sink first, though. They'll drive me crazy otherwise." "Oh, you're one of those. Maybe I should have known that about you before I asked you to marry me." She glared at him. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm sure I don't care. I'm me." He laughed. "I'll set the show up while you get the dishes in the sink." 10 minutes later, she joined him on the couch, curling up close to his side. "I like spending time with you." "Because I watch your show with you?" he asked, his thumb hovering over the play button. "Well, I do like that, I have to say. None of my sisters would ever watch it with me." She shook her head. "No, I enjoy spending time with you because I like you a lot." "Are we crazy to get married when there's only a lot of like going on?" He shook his head. "I don't think so. So many marriages fail when people think they're madly in love. It burns out." "Do you know a lot of people who have divorced?" Grace didn't know anyone who had ever divorced. People she knew stuck it out, no matter what. He nodded. "Unfortunately, I do a lot of family law. I hate watching couples fall apart and then fight over their children. No one ever wins." "I'm sorry you have to do that." I wish everyone just stayed together forever. Me too. He pushed the play button, snuggling her close to his side. He didn't mind her show, because he rarely actually looked at the people on it. No, he spent his time looking at her instead. He loved watching her face change with the scenes. They made it through 2 episodes that night before she had to go. Tomorrow is going to be interesting. We're all going to bake like crazy to get in inventory before we actually open our doors to the public on Thursday. So you can't sit on my couch and kiss me all night long? She shook her head. Only in my dreams. Well, if you promise to dream about kissing me. She pulled his head down for a quick kiss. There. Will that sustain you for an hour or 2? He shrugged. I wouldn't object to another 6 or 7 kisses. You're getting greedy. Wait till we're married. You don't know greedy yet. She blushed, trying not to let his words bother her. Well, it'll all be right. Then. I understand. Dropping one more kiss onto her lips, he got to his feet and led her to the door. I almost forgot. What? What do you get when you cross a blonde and a lawyer? Careful now. You're a blonde. I don't know. There are some things even a blonde won't do. He grabbed her in a bear hug, kissing her neck. No more lawyer jokes. No more tonight. I agree. Is ever too much to ask for? Oh, most definitely. She winked at him. You know how much I love lawyer jokes. I don't know what you'd do without them. I think I could make it through. In fact, I'm sure of it. Once they were in the truck, she looked down at her hand. I love my ring. Good. I can't wait till Saturday. Any idea what time? She asked. What time does the bakery close? I think we decided 4. How about 7 then? Do you mind if my grandfather marries us? Not if it's legal. I'd rather be able to tell my parents we were married by a minister anyway. Marcus drove the short distance to the Culpepper ranch. Do you have a car? He asked. He couldn't believe he hadn't thought of that. He could take her back and forth, of course, but it would be easier if she had her own. She shook her head. I need to leave the car on her and I share for her. And I can't afford to buy one until the Culpeppers have paid off Travis. He knew she'd come to help out, so he asked nothing beyond that. We'll make it work. His mind was racing. He wasn't rich, but he certainly had enough money saved up to buy her a truck. He would rather she had a 4-wheel drive in Wyoming in the winter anyway. They had several months before they needed to worry about that, though. For now, something to drive her back and forth was all she needed. He stopped in front of Linda's house, cutting the engine. I kiss good night? He asked. How did you ever survive without my kisses? I have no idea. After a moment, he sighed. I'm going to have to let you out. Tomorrow night? He stroked her arm, not wanting their time together to end so soon. She thought about it for a moment. She had so much to do, but she really didn't want to avoid seeing him. That would be good. Do you have a minute? Now? He nodded. Why? They made it through 2 episodes that night before she had to go. Tomorrow is going to be interesting. We're all going to bake like crazy to get in inventory before we actually open our doors to the public on Thursday. So you can't sit on my couch and kiss me all night long? She shook her head. Only in my dreams. Well, if you promise to dream about kissing me. She pulled his head down for a quick kiss. There. Will that sustain you for an hour or two? He shrugged. I wouldn't object to another 6 or 7 kisses. You're getting greedy. Wait till we're married. You don't know greedy yet. She blushed, trying not to let his words bother her. Well, it'll all be right. Then. I understand. Dropping one more kiss onto her lips, he got to his feet and led her to the door. I almost forgot. What? What do you get when you cross a blonde and a lawyer? Careful now. You're a blonde. I don't know. There are some things even a blonde won't do. He grabbed her in a bear hug, kissing her neck. No more lawyer jokes. No more tonight. I agree. Is ever too much to ask for? Oh, most definitely. She winked at him. You know how much I love lawyer jokes. I don't know what you'd do without them. I think I could make it through. In fact, I'm sure of it. Once they were in the truck, she looked down at her hand. I love my ring. Good. I can't wait till Saturday. Any idea what time? She asked. What time does the bakery close? I think we decided 4. How about 7 then? Do you mind if my grandfather marries us? Not if it's legal. I'd rather be able to tell my parents we were married by a minister anyway. Marcus drove the short distance to the Culpepper ranch. Do you have a car? He asked. He couldn't believe he hadn't thought of that. He could take her back and forth, of course, but it would be easier if she had her own. She shook her head. I need to leave the car on her and I share for her. And I can't afford to buy one until the Culpeppers have paid off Travis. He knew she'd come to help out, so he asked nothing beyond that. We'll make it work. His mind was racing. He wasn't rich, but he certainly had enough money saved up to buy her a truck. He would rather she had a 4-wheel drive in Wyoming in the winter anyway. They had several months before they needed to worry about that, though. For now, something to drive her back and forth was all she needed. He stopped in front of Linda's house, cutting the engine. I kiss good night? He asked. How did you ever survive without my kisses? I have no idea. After a moment, he sighed. I'm going to have to let you out. Tomorrow night? He stroked her arm, not wanting their time together to end so soon. She thought about it for a moment. She had so much to do, but she really didn't want to avoid seeing him. That would be good. Do you have a minute? Now? He nodded. Why? You haven't met my twin yet. I want you to. She hoped Honor was home. She really felt like she was doing something wrong by getting engaged to a man her twin hadn't met yet. Are you too close? As close as identical twins who are nothing alike can be. Marcus thought about that as he got out of the truck and walked around, taking her hand in his. Why are you nothing alike? She shrugged. More than anything, I think it stemmed from the fact that our mother loved the whole identical thing. She always dressed us alike. She put the same bows in our hair. Grace shook her head. So Honor went one way, and I went the other. Meaning? He imagined Honor running around in a clown suit, hoping that wasn't the case. Well, I'm super self-conscious about how I dress. I'm always in neat, tidy clothes. Honor dresses like a man. She refuses to wear dresses, no matter how mad it makes our parents. She likes everything outdoorsy. She's really getting dressed up if she puts her hair into a ponytail. For me, a ponytail is sloppy. You'll never have trouble telling us apart. It doesn't sound like I will. He shook his head. So I need to expect you. But not you. She grinned. Kind of, but not really. She opened the front door, her eyes searching for a sign of life. To her delight, Honor was in the living room with Linda. When her sister looked up at her, she grinned. So this must be Marcus, the great white shark, I mean, lawyer. Same thing, Grace said quickly, giggling. Honor winked at her sister, getting to her feet and going over to meet Marcus. Sorry. I couldn't resist channeling Grace for just 1 second. Marcus looked at the girl in front of him. Her face was very like Grace's, but she wore no makeup at all. She wore jeans and a button-up shirt, which was the same as what Grace was wearing, but she wore it so differently. Her shirt was untucked, and there was mud on her jeans. She smelled like she'd just come in from the stable. Hi, Honor. I'm glad to meet you. Honor nodded. It's nice to meet you, too. Grace held her hand out for Honor to see the ring. We're getting married Saturday. Honor smiled, hugging Grace. Congratulations. You'll be my maid of honor, right? Honor laughed at the pun. Only if I get to wear pants. As far as I'm concerned, you can show up in what you're wearing. It won't hurt me any. I might just do that. You never can tell.